The notification sound from my phone cut through the quiet Tuesday evening like a knife. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Robert bought me for our 40th anniversary, working on a crossword puzzle while he was at his weekly poker game with the boys. At 73, I'd grown comfortable with our predictable routines. Tuesdays meant poker night. Wednesdays meant grocery shopping together. Sundays meant our ritual coffee and newspaper reading on the back porch. But this notification felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the blue light from my phone seemed brighter in the dimming Arizona sunset. Or maybe it was the strange heaviness in my chest that had been growing for months. I reached for my reading glasses, the ones hanging from the beaded chain my sister Carmen gave me last Christmas, and squinted at the screen. Facebook friend request from Sofia Martinez. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for what felt like several seconds before lurching back to life with painful intensity. Martinez. That was Robert's last name. Our last name. The name I'd carried proudly for 45 years. The name that represented our little family of two against the world. With trembling fingers, I tapped on the notification. The profile picture loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, revealing a beautiful young woman with warm brown eyes and a radiant smile. She looked to be in her late 20s with long dark hair cascading over her shoulders and laugh lines that reminded me of someone. My breath caught in my throat when I realized who. Those were Robert's eyes. Exactly Robert's eyes. The same deep brown with golden flecks that had made me fall in love with him at a church social in 1979. The same eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed at my terrible jokes. The same eyes that had filled with tears every Christmas when I lit a memorial candle for his lost family. His entire family died in a car accident when he was 20. Robert had told me on our third date, his voice breaking with what I thought was grief. I'm all alone in this world, Elena. That's why finding you feels like such a miracle. I'd held him that night as he cried into my shoulder, and I'd spent the next 4.5 decades trying to fill the void left by his tragic loss. We never had children because Robert said he couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else he loved. I gave up my dreams of big, chaotic family gatherings and holiday traditions passed down through generations. Instead, we created our own tiny universe of two. But this girl, this Sofia Martinez, was very much alive, and she was reaching out to me. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the phone. The crossword puzzle slipped from my lap, scattering to the floor along with my pen. The familiar sounds of our neighborhood seemed to fade away. Mrs. Chen's dog barking next door, the distant hum of traffic on Camelback Road, the gentle whir of our air conditioning. All I could hear was the thundering of my own heartbeat, and a voice in my head asking the same question over and over. Who is Sofia Martinez? I stared at her profile picture for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. She had Robert's nose, too, I realized, and his stubborn chin. But she had something else. Something Robert had lost somewhere along the way. Hope.
Joy.
The kind of light in her eyes that comes from being surrounded by people who love you. The timestamp on the friend request showed it had come in 23 minutes ago. 23 minutes ago, while my husband was supposedly playing poker with Larry and Mike and Joe, telling the same stories he'd told for decades about his solitary life before me. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. But as I sat there in my quiet living room, holding my phone like it contained a bomb, ready to explode my entire world, I had no idea that this single friend request was about to unravel 45 years of lies and lead me to the family I never knew I had. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly crafted our life together was. Like a beautiful snow globe that seemed complete until you realized what was missing outside its borders. For 45 years, Robert and I had built something that felt solid, meaningful, and full of love. We were the couple everyone envied. Still holding hands at the grocery store, still laughing at each other's stories, still saying, "I love you," every morning over coffee. Our house on Maple Street in Phoenix was modest but warm, filled with memories we'd carefully constructed together. Robert had painted every room by hand, insisting we couldn't afford contractors, but secretly, I think, wanting to put his personal touch on every corner of our sanctuary. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the apple pie I'd baked for Sunday dinners, a tradition I'd started because Robert said it reminded him of the home he'd lost. The living room walls displayed photos of just the two of us. Wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, anniversary celebrations, a visual testament to our complete devotion to each other. I remember how he used to trace my face with his fingertips on Sunday mornings, whispering, "You're my whole world, Mamor. My beginning and my end." Those words made me feel like the most precious thing on earth. When other wives complained about in-laws or family drama during holidays, I'd smile sympathetically while secretly feeling grateful. We didn't need anyone else. We were enough. Our traditions were simple but sacred. Every Christmas Eve, we'd light a white candle and sit in comfortable silence while I said a prayer for his family who died so tragically young. Robert would hold my hand tightly, his eyes glistening with what I believed was grief for parents and siblings he'd never see again. "Thank you for keeping their memory alive," he'd whisper, kissing my forehead. "You have such a beautiful heart, Elena." I gave up so much for our insular life, though I never called it giving up back then. When the principal offered me the head of the English department at Roosevelt High School, I turned it down because the extra hours would mean less time with Robert. When my college roommate invited us to her daughter's wedding in California, we didn't go because Robert said crowds made him anxious. "We don't need anyone else," he'd remind me. "We have everything right here." Our financial decisions revolved around taking care of just us. We saved modestly, traveled occasionally to places like Sedona or the Grand Canyon, and never worried about college funds or inheritance planning. Robert handled our money, and I trusted him completely. "You're too generous, Elena," he'd tease when I wanted to donate to children's charities. "We need to think about our retirement first." Every evening, Robert would come home from his job at Miller's auto shop with grease under his fingernails and stories about the cars he'd fixed. I'd have dinner waiting, his favorite pot roast on Mondays, fish tacos on Fridays, always with fresh tortillas I'd learned to make just for him. He'd tell me about his day while I rubbed his shoulders. And then we'd watch the news together, his arm around me on our old couch. "Do you ever regret not having children?" I asked him once about 10 years into our marriage. His face went pale, and he pulled me closer. "Elena, losing my family taught me that love is fragile. I can't handle the thought of losing you, or anyone else I care about. You're more than enough family for me. Promise me you'll never doubt that." I promised, and I meant it. For decades, I wore his need for our closed circle like a badge of honor. I was the woman who could be everything to one man: wife, best friend, confidant, the keeper of his painful memories. I protected our bubble fiercely, turning down invitations that might intrude on our sacred space. Now I realize I wasn't protecting our love. I was guarding his secrets. It was a Tuesday morning in April, 3 months before everything fell apart, and spring was finally showing its face in Phoenix. The desert air still held that perfect coolness that would disappear by June, and I was humming while folding laundry in our bedroom when Robert's phone rang from the nightstand. He was in the shower, and the sound of running water mixed with his off-key singing of an old Johnny Cash song he'd loved since we were young. The phone kept ringing with an insistence that felt urgent, the way phones ring when someone really needs to reach you. After 5 rings, my motherly instincts kicked in. What if it was an emergency? What if someone was hurt? "Hello, this is Elena," I answered, expecting maybe Larry from the auto shop or Dr. Peterson's office confirming Robert's annual checkup. Instead, a warm male voice with a slight Texas accent said, "Hey, Bobby, it's James. I was calling to see if you're coming to Mom's 90th birthday party next month. Sarah's been asking about Elena, and we're all hoping she can finally come meet everyone." The words hit me like cold water. Bobby, Mom's 90th birthday, Elena meeting everyone. I stood frozen in our bedroom, holding Robert's phone like it might bite me, while this stranger continued talking about people who couldn't possibly exist. "Bobby, you there, brother?" "Brother," he said. "Brother, I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "This is Elena, Robert's wife. He's in the shower right now. Can I take a message?" The silence that followed lasted forever. I could hear the shower still running, Robert still singing, completely unaware that his world was about to shift. Finally, the man cleared his throat awkwardly.
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have. I think I dialed the wrong number. I was looking for a different Bobby. Please excuse the interruption. The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone, replaying every word of the conversation. James had called Robert Bobby with the familiarity of someone who'd known him his whole life. He'd mentioned a mother turning 90, a Sarah who was asking about me, people who wanted to meet me, and he'd called Robert with such casual affection that it couldn't have been a mistake. The shower stopped and Robert's voice called out cheerfully, "Who was on the phone?" "Mamor." I walked into the bathroom where he was toweling off, his gray hair still thick and curly despite his 75 years. He looked at me with those warm brown eyes I'd fallen in love with. The same eyes that had filled with tears every time he talked about his dead family. "Someone named James," I said carefully, watching his face. He was looking for Bobby. Robert's hand stopped moving on the towel. For just a moment, his face went completely white, and I saw something I'd never seen before.
fear.
Raw, panicked fear. But it passed so quickly, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "Wrong number," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the small bathroom. "Happens all the time. A common name, you know." He kissed my forehead and walked past me to get dressed, but his hands were shaking as he reached for his shirt. I'd lived with this man for 45 years. I knew every gesture, every expression, every tell. Robert was lying to me. "He seemed to know you," I pressed gently. "He mentioned someone's birthday party."
Elena.
Robert's voice carried a sharpness I'd rarely heard before. It was a wrong number. Someone was looking for a different Bobby. "Can we please drop it?" The conversation ended there, but something had shifted between us. As I watched him get dressed, avoiding eye contact and fumbling with buttons he'd fastened thousands of times before, I felt the first crack appear in the foundation of everything I'd believed about our life together. That night, he held me extra tight, whispering, "I love you," over and over like he was afraid I might disappear. I should have known then that he was the one who was disappearing. After the phone call from James, I couldn't unsee the cracks that started appearing everywhere in our carefully constructed life. It was like noticing a small leak in your roof and then suddenly becoming aware of every water stain, every loose shingle, every sign that your shelter wasn't as solid as you'd believed. The greeting cards started bothering me first. For years, Robert had received birthday and Christmas cards with no return address, just postmarked from various cities across Texas and Arizona. He'd always claimed they were from former customers who remembered his good work. People grateful for the times he'd fixed their cars when they couldn't afford to pay. "I helped a lot of folks over the years," he'd say, tucking the cards away quickly. "Some people never forget kindness." But now, watching him read those cards, I noticed how his face would soften with an expression I'd never seen before. Tender, nostalgic, almost guilty. He'd hold them longer than seemed natural for cards from grateful strangers, sometimes rereading them twice before sliding them into his toolbox in the garage where he thought I wouldn't look. The phone calls became more frequent, too. Always when he thought I was occupied, he'd step onto the back porch or walk to the mailbox, speaking in hushed tones that carried a warmth and familiarity that made my chest ache. When I'd ask who called, he'd have ready explanations. Telemarketers, wrong numbers. Larry from work checking on parts orders. But telemarketers don't make you smile the way Robert smiled during those conversations. And wrong numbers don't make you laugh with such genuine joy. "Who are you talking to?" I asked one evening after catching him through the kitchen window, animated and gesturing with his hands the way he did when he was telling stories. "Insurance company," he said without missing a beat. "They're always calling about updating our policy." But I'd seen him through that window, and nobody talks to insurance companies with their face lit up like Christmas morning. The worst part was how I started censoring myself around my own husband. When my sister Carmen suggested we all take a weekend trip to Flagstaff, I mentioned it to Robert excitedly, already imagining the four of us hiking through the pines. His face went dark immediately. "I don't like traveling with other people, Elena. You know that. Why can't it just be us?" But it wasn't just about Carmen anymore. Any mention of expanding our social circle, visiting new places, or even talking about our future made him uncomfortable. When I suggested we visit his hometown in Texas for our anniversary, just to see where you grew up, to feel closer to your past, he became agitated in a way that scared me. "There's nothing there for me anymore," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Everything I need is right here. Why do you keep pushing this?" I wasn't pushing anything. I was just trying to love him the way I always had. But suddenly, my love felt intrusive, unwelcome, like I was asking for too much. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to mention anything that might trigger one of his defensive reactions. The man who used to share every thought with me became a stranger who guarded his words. Our conversations grew surface level: weather, grocery lists, neighborhood gossip, while the deep soul-bearing talks that had defined our marriage disappeared entirely. When I tried to bring back our old intimacy by asking about his childhood memories or his dreams, he changed the subject so abruptly it gave me whiplash. "Robert, do you ever think about what your parents would say about our life together?" I asked one Sunday morning during our coffee ritual. He set his mug down so hard it sloshed. "Elena, they're dead. Why would I torture myself thinking about things that can never happen?" But the way he said it didn't sound like grief anymore. It sounded like guilt. I began to feel like I was living with a ghost, someone who looked like my husband but had forgotten how to let me in. The loneliness was suffocating, made worse by the fact that I couldn't explain it to anyone, not even Carmen. How do you tell people that the man you've loved for 45 years suddenly feels like a stranger? The humiliation came on a perfect Saturday evening in May at Dorothy and Frank Kellerman's retirement party. The Kellermans had been our neighbors for 15 years, and Dorothy had insisted on throwing a big celebration in their backyard, complete with string lights and her famous 7-layer cake. I'd spent the afternoon helping her set up, grateful for any excuse to get out of our increasingly tense house. Robert had been reluctant to go, making excuses about being tired and preferring quiet evenings, but I'd pressed him. "We never go anywhere anymore," I'd said, trying to keep the pleading out of my voice. "It's just next door, and Dorothy's been so good to us over the years." The party was lovely, filled with neighbors I'd known for decades, their adult children visiting from out of state, and the kind of warm community feeling I'd been craving. I found myself gravitating toward a group of wives my age who were clustered around the dessert table, sharing stories about their marriages and families with the easy intimacy of women who'd weathered decades together. "You and Robert are so lucky," said Margaret Chen, Larry's wife from the auto shop. 45 years together, and you still look at each other like newlyweds. What's your secret?" I felt my cheeks warm with pride. Despite our recent struggles, we did still love each other deeply. "I think it's because we've always been each other's whole world," I said, accepting a glass of Dorothy's famous sangria. "Robert lost his entire family when he was young, so we learned early on that we're all we need." The women around me made sympathetic sounds, and I continued, feeling more confident as the sangria loosened my tongue. "It was a terrible car accident when he was 20. Parents, siblings, everyone gone in one night. But you know what? I think that tragedy made us stronger. We don't take each other for granted because we know how precious family is. We don't need big holiday gatherings or complicated in-law drama. We have something pure." The women nodded appreciatively, and Susan Rodriguez, Carmen's friend from church, squeezed my arm. "That's beautiful, Elena. You two really are blessed." I excused myself to use the restroom, feeling lighter than I had in months. Maybe I'd been overthinking Robert's recent behavior. Maybe those phone calls really were wrong numbers and insurance companies. Maybe I was just being paranoid because I was getting older and more afraid of losing what we had. But as I walked back toward the group, I heard my name carried on the evening breeze. I paused behind the rose bushes, not meaning to eavesdrop, but unable to help myself. "Poor Elena," Margaret was saying, her voice heavy with pity. "She has no idea, does she?" "None at all," Susan replied. "My cousin Maria works at the hospital in Tucson. She saw Robert at a family reunion there last year. Big gathering, at least 30 people. Maria said he was holding babies, playing with kids, looked completely at home. My sangria glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the concrete patio. The women turned toward the sound, and I stepped into the light, my face burning with shame and confusion. Elena, Margaret gasped, her face going pale. We didn't see you there. Family reunion? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. The silence that followed was deafening. These women, some of whom I'd known for 2 decades, stared at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment that made me want to disappear into the desert night. Elena, honey, Susan finally said gently. Maybe you should talk to Robert about this. But I could see in their faces that they'd known for who knows how long. They'd been watching me make a fool of myself, talking about our beautiful, pure love, while my husband was living a double life. They'd been pitying me, the naive old woman whose husband had been lying to her for decades. I mumbled some excuse about not feeling well and fled to our house, leaving Robert at the party. I locked myself in our bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing myself through their eyes for the first time. Elena Martinez, the woman too stupid to know her own husband's secrets. The worst part wasn't the lies Robert had told me. It was realizing that everyone else had known the truth, while I'd been proudly defending our perfect love story to anyone who would listen. Robert came home from the party an hour after I'd fled, his footsteps heavy on our hardwood floors. I was sitting in our bedroom, still in my navy blue dress with the scattered glass beads I'd chosen so carefully that afternoon, feeling like I was made of the same fragile material. The sangria had worn off, leaving behind a clarity that cut like broken glass. He found me there in the dim light, hands folded in my lap, staring at the wedding photo on our dresser. 45 years ago, we'd looked so young and hopeful, promising to love and honor each other through everything life could throw at us. I wondered if he'd been lying even then. His voice was tentative, careful. Dorothy said, "You weren't feeling well. Are you okay?" I looked up at this man I'd shared my life with, the stranger who knew exactly how I liked my coffee in the morning and could predict my reaction to every movie we watched, but who had somehow managed to hide an entire family from me for nearly 5 decades. "Tell me about the family reunion in Tucson," I said quietly. The color drained from his face, so completely, I thought he might faint. For a moment, he just stood there in the doorway of our bedroom, one hand gripping the frame like he needed it to stay upright. I watched the careful mask he'd worn for 45 years finally slip, revealing something raw and panicked underneath. "Who told you about that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. "Is it true, Robert? Do you have family? Living family?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, whether he could still salvage this lie that had become the foundation of our entire marriage. "Elena, I can explain." "Explain what?" The words came out louder than I intended, carrying 45 years of suppressed doubt and 3 months of growing suspicion. "Explain how you lied to me every single day for almost half a century? Explain how you let me light memorial candles for people who are alive? Explain how you made me feel guilty for wanting a bigger family when you already had one." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Robert? What is it exactly?" I was standing now, my voice rising with each word. "Because right now, I think my husband has been lying to me about the most fundamental thing in his life. I think I've been married to someone who doesn't exist." He stepped toward me, his hands reaching out like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Elena, please just let me explain. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, but it came out broken and bitter. "You know it's complicated, Robert? Spending 45 years believing you're enough for someone when they have a whole other life you're not worthy of knowing about. That's complicated." "You are enough," he said desperately. "You're everything to me, Elena. That's why I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" "Couldn't trust me? Couldn't let me be part of your real life?" Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to discover that the person you've loved most in this world thinks so little of you that he'd rather pretend his family is dead than introduce you to them?" He was crying now, too. but I felt nothing but emptiness watching his tears. It wasn't about you not being worthy.
It was about me.
I was ashamed, Elena. I was a different person before I met you, and I wanted a fresh start. So, you erased your entire existence and made me complicit in the lie? I walked to our closet and pulled out the small suitcase I used for weekend trips to see Carmen. 45 years, Robert. 45 years of marriage built on a foundation of lies. Where are you going? Panic crept into his voice as he watched me fold clothes with mechanical precision. To Carmen's house. I didn't look at him. I need time to think about who I actually married. Elena, please don't leave. We can work through this. I'll tell you everything. I promise. I turned to face him one last time, seeing clearly for the first time in months. The problem isn't that you won't tell me everything now, Robert. The problem is that you never thought I deserved to know anything at all. I walked past him toward the guest room, dragging my suitcase behind me. That night, I slept in the bed where I'd been exiled after questioning him, while he paced the hallway outside like a ghost haunting his own house. The man who had called me his whole world had made me feel like I wasn't even worth the truth. Carmen's guest room smelled like lavender and old books, a comforting combination that should have soothed me, but instead amplified the hollow ache in my chest. I'd been there for 3 days, and my sister had been patient, bringing me tea I didn't drink and meals I couldn't taste. But I could see the worry growing in her eyes. I was disappearing, even for myself. The worst part wasn't the anger or the betrayal. It was the questions that circled my mind like vultures, picking apart every memory I'd treasured. Had Robert grimaced internally every time I lit those memorial candles? When I'd suggested we name our hypothetical children after his dead parents, had he been secretly relieved we never had kids because he wouldn't have to explain why we couldn't use those names? Every tender moment we'd shared around his supposed loss now felt like elaborate theater, with me as the unwitting audience applauding his performance. On Thursday morning, I found myself sitting in Carmen's garden at 4 a.m., still in the same clothes I'd worn to bed. The sprinkler system had turned on automatically, sending arcs of water across the desert landscaping, and I didn't move even as the spray began to soak through my thin nightgown. The cold water felt like the only real thing in a world that had suddenly become make-believe. 45 years, I whispered to Carmen's roses. 45 years of defending him to people who probably knew the truth. I thought about all the times I gently corrected people who assumed we had extended family. Oh no, Robert's an orphan. I'd say with such pride in my voice, like being his only family made me special. I remember declining invitations to family gatherings because Robert said they made him sad. I'd been so understanding, so protective of his supposed grief, while he was probably calculating how to avoid running into relatives who might blow his cover. The water from the sprinklers kept hitting me, but I felt numb to everything. The cold, the wet fabric clinging to my skin, the hard concrete beneath me. I'd spent my entire adult life building my identity around being Robert's everything. And now I was nothing. Not his everything, not even worthy of honesty. Just Elena, the woman naive enough to believe a lie for 5 decades. My phone buzzed constantly with Robert's calls and texts. Please come home. I love you. Let me explain. But his words felt empty now, just more performances. How could I trust anything he said when his entire relationship with me had been built on deception? How could I even trust my own memories when half of them were reactions to lies? I thought about our friends, our neighbors, the life we'd built that everyone admired. How many of them knew? How many times had I been the last person to understand my own life? The humiliation was suffocating. But underneath it was something worse. The growing realization that I didn't know who I was without being Robert's wife, his protector, his whole world. Carmen found me there as the sun was coming up, soaked through and shivering. She didn't say anything, just wrapped a towel around my shoulders and sat beside me on the wet concrete. I don't know who I am, I finally said, my voice hoarse from crying. For 45 years, I've been Elena who loved Robert completely. Elena who was enough for a broken man. Elena who understood tragedy. But none of that was real, Carmen. I've been loving a fiction. "You've been loving completely," Carmen said softly. "That's real, even if his story wasn't." But sitting there in the growing light, watching the water continue its relentless pattern across the garden, I felt like I was drowning in the wreckage of my own life. Everything I'd believed about love, trust, and marriage had been revealed as elaborate self-deception. I was 73 years old, and I had no idea who I actually was or what my life had actually meant. The sprinklers finally shut off, leaving me sitting in a puddle of water and shattered certainty, wondering if I had the strength to start over, or if this was how my story would end. Not with love triumphant, but with the slow dissolution of everything I'd thought was true. I was sitting in Carmen's kitchen on Sunday morning, mechanically stirring sugar into coffee I had no intention of drinking, when the notification sound from my phone cut through the silence like a bell. Carmen was at early mass, and the house felt too quiet, too empty, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The Facebook notification glowed on my screen. Friend request from Sofia Martinez. Martinez. Our name. The name I'd carried with pride for 45 years. The name that represented everything I thought I knew about belonging. My hands started trembling before I even opened the request, some deep instinct warning me that this moment would change everything. I tapped the notification with a finger that felt disconnected from my body, and Sophia's profile picture loaded slowly on Carmen's spotty internet connection. First, her smile appeared, bright and genuine and achingly familiar. Then, her eyes, Robert's eyes, unmistakably Robert's eyes, looking back at me with warmth and intelligence. She was beautiful in a way that made you think of Sunday mornings and family gatherings, with long dark hair and laugh lines that spoke of a life filled with joy. But it was her cover photo that made me gasp out loud, a sound that echoed in Carmen's empty kitchen like a gunshot. There was Robert, my Robert, sitting at what looked like a restaurant table, his arms around two elderly people who had his same stubborn chin and gentle smile. The caption read, "Celebrating Grandma and Grandpa's 70th anniversary. Uncle Bobby makes the best toasts." Uncle Bobby posted 6 months ago. My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against Carmen's tile floor in an explosion of ceramic and lukewarm coffee. But I barely noticed because I was scrolling through Sophia's photos with shaking fingers. Each image revealed another piece of the life Robert had hidden from me. Christmas morning. Robert in a living room I'd never seen, surrounded by children unwrapping presents. His face lit up with joy I'd never witnessed. Uncle Bobby spoils us every year. The caption read, "A 4th of July barbecue." Robert flipping burgers while a woman who looked exactly like him, his sister, it had to be his sister, laughed at something he was saying. Both of them wearing matching aprons that said, "Martinez Family Chefs." A birthday party. Robert holding a toddler who is blowing out candles on a dinosaur cake. Both of them covered in frosting and grinning at the camera. Uncle Bobby and little Miguel making memories. Photo after photo of a man I'd been married to for 45 years, living a life I'd never been allowed to know existed. Family dinners and graduation parties and holiday celebrations and lazy Sunday afternoons. A whole universe of love and laughter and connection that had been happening parallel to our supposedly complete life together. I scrolled faster, hungry for more evidence, more proof that everything I'd believed was a lie. There were photos of Robert with what must have been his children. Adults now with families of their own calling him Dad in the comments. There were pictures of him at what looked like family reunions wearing t-shirts that said Martinez Family Pride and World's Best Dad, Grandpa, Brother. And then I found the video that broke me completely. It was from last Thanksgiving, a short clip of Robert carving turkey while a whole table full of people sang, "We are family." Off-key, the camera panned around the table showing faces that all carried pieces of Robert's features, his nose, his smile, his eyes. These people weren't strangers. They were his family. His very alive, very loving, very real family. In the video, someone called out, "Speech, Uncle Bobby," and Robert stood up, raising a glass of what looked like wine. His voice, so familiar it made my chest ache, filled Carmen's kitchen through my phone's tiny speaker. "I'm grateful for all of you," he said, his eyes bright with tears. Family is everything. You all know I haven't always been the man I should be, but you've never given up on me. That's what love looks like. The video ended with everyone cheering and hugging, and I sat there in Carmen's kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic, finally understanding the magnitude of what had been stolen from me. Not just honesty, not just trust, but the chance to be part of something bigger than our isolated bubble of two. I screamed then, a sound that came from somewhere so deep I didn't know it existed. And Carmen's neighbor's dog started barking in response. 45 years. 45 years of believing I was his whole world when I wasn't even a footnote in his real story. Carmen found me on her kitchen floor 20 minutes later, surrounded by shattered ceramic and clutching my phone like a lifeline to reality. I was still screaming, but the sound had turned into something between sobbing and laughing. The kind of break that happens when your mind can't process the sheer magnitude of betrayal. Elena, Misha, what happened? Carmen rushed to me, her church dress rustling as she knelt in the coffee and broken pieces, reaching for my phone to understand what had sent me over the edge. I watched her face change as she scrolled through Sophia's photos, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to pure rage. "Imo," she whispered, then louder. That lying son of a. Carmen had never used language like that in her 70 years. Not even when her husband died. Not even when she lost her teaching job to budget cuts. But seeing her baby sister destroyed by decades of lies had unlocked something fierce in her that I'd never seen before. "Look at them," I said, my voice raw from screaming. "Look how happy they all are. Look how much they love him. And I wasn't even worth mentioning. 45 years, Carmen. I lit candles for these people every Christmas while they were probably sitting around their table wondering why Uncle Bobby never talked about his wife." Carmen sat back on her heels, glass crunching under her sensible church shoes. "Elena, listen to me. Look at me." She gripped my shoulders with surprising strength. "You are not the fool in this story. You are not the one who chose lies over love. You loved completely and honestly, and that is never wrong, even when the person receiving it doesn't deserve it." Something in her words, or maybe the way she said them with such fierce certainty, cut through the fog of self-pity that had been suffocating me for days. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been too broken to notice. Respect. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine respect for the woman who had loved without reservation for 45 years. "You know what this means, don't you?" Carmen continued, helping me to my feet and steering me away from the broken mug. "You're not the woman who wasn't worthy of the truth. You're the woman who was too good for his lies." I felt something shift inside me then, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. For the first time in days, I wasn't thinking about what Robert had taken from me. I was thinking about what I'd given freely, generously, completely, and how that said everything about who I was and nothing about what I deserved. "They look happy," I said, studying Sophia's profile picture again. "His family. They look like good people." "They probably are good people," Carmen agreed. "Which makes what he did to them even worse. He didn't just lie to you, Elena. He erased you from their lives, too. They probably would have loved you." The truth of that hit me like lightning. All these years, I'd thought I was protecting Robert's grief by not pushing for details about his family. But I hadn't been protecting grief. I'd been enabling shame, his shame, not mine. He hadn't kept his family from me because I wasn't good enough for them. He'd kept me from them because he was ashamed of the lies he'd built his new life on. "I want to respond to Sophia's friend request," I said suddenly, surprising myself with a steadiness in my voice. Carmen looked at me carefully. "Are you sure? That's opening a door you can't close." "I've spent 3 days thinking my life was over because I discovered I'd been living a lie," I said, wiping my face with the dish towel Carmen handed me. "But maybe my real life is just beginning. Maybe for the first time in 45 years, I get to make a choice based on the truth." I felt something I hadn't felt since that first phone call from James months ago. Curiosity instead of fear. These people existed. They were real. And for reasons I didn't understand yet, one of them wanted to connect with me. "What are you going to do?" Carmen asked. I looked at my sister, This woman who had loved me unconditionally through every crisis of my life and felt a spark of the person I used to be before I became Robert's everything. I'm going to find out who Elena Martinez really is, I said. And I'm going to do it without asking anyone's permission. I spent the next week transforming into someone I barely recognized, a woman who planned instead of simply reacted, who gathered information instead of accepting explanations, who prepared for war while smiling peacefully over morning coffee. Carmen watched this metamorphosis with fascination and growing admiration, bringing me endless cups of tea while I worked at her dining room table like a detective solving the crime of my own life. First, I accepted Sophia's friend request and dove deep into the digital archaeology of Robert's hidden world. I screenshotted everything: family photos spanning decades, birthday wishes from siblings I didn't know existed, comments from grandchildren who called him Grandpa Bobby. I created a folder on Carmen's old laptop titled Family Photos and methodically organized 45 years of evidence that my husband had been living a double life. The most devastating discovery was a Facebook post from last Mother's Day. Robert's daughter, a beautiful woman in her 40s who looked exactly like me at that age, had shared a photo of Robert pushing an elderly woman in a wheelchair through what looked like a garden. The caption read, "Dad took Grandma Rose to see the botanical gardens today. After 92 years, she still lights up when she sees flowers. We're so lucky to have a father who shows up for family no matter what." I stared at that photo for an hour, studying the tenderness in Robert's face as he bent down to show his mother something blooming. This was the man who had told me his parents died tragically when he was 20. This was the mother whose memorial candle I had lit faithfully for 4 decades. She was not only alive, she was thriving, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her, including my husband. But instead of dissolving into tears, as I had all week, I felt something cold and sharp settling in my chest. Clarity, purpose, the kind of focused anger that doesn't scream or break dishes, but instead plans quietly and executes perfectly. I opened a bank account at Desert Community Credit Union using my maiden name for the first time in 45 years, Elena Rodriguez, the woman I had been before I became Mrs. Martinez. I transferred exactly half of our savings, money I had earned during my teaching years, money from the small inheritance my mother left me, money that was as much mine as it was his. I wasn't stealing, I was reclaiming. Then I made an appointment with Patricia Hernandez, a divorce attorney Carmen's friend had recommended. "I'm not ready to file yet," I told Patricia during our consultation. "But I want to understand my options. I want to know what starting over looks like at 73. Patricia was younger than my eldest students had been, but she listened with the gravity of someone who understood that some betrayals require legal remedies. "Take your time," she said, handing me a folder of documents. "But document everything. If this goes to court, you'll want proof of the deception." I also began seeing Dr. Sarah Chin, a therapist who specialized in late-life transitions. I told Robert the first was joining a book club that met twice a week, and technically it wasn't entirely a lie. Dr. Chin had assigned me to read about rebuilding identity after long-term relationships. "You've spent 45 years being someone's wife," she said during our second session. "Now you need to remember how to be Elena." The hardest part of my preparation was the acting. When Robert called from Carmen's guest phone, I'd stopped answering my own phone. I kept my voice neutral and tired. Not angry, not devastated, just exhausted. "I need more time," I'd tell him. "This isn't something I can just get over." And it wasn't acting. Not really. I did need time, but not to forgive him or figure out how to rebuild our marriage. I needed time to dismantle the life we'd built together and decide what pieces, if any, were worth saving. Robert began sending flowers to Carmen's house, my favorites, yellow roses with baby's breath. The cards were increasingly desperate. "I love you. Please come home. We can work through this." I pressed the flowers in books and saved the cards, not out of sentimentality, but as evidence of his attempts to manipulate me back into accepting his lies. Meanwhile, I was quietly building a case for the life I deserved. A life built on truth, even if that truth was painful. A life where I was the protagonist of my own story, not a supporting character in someone else's elaborate fiction. Robert had no idea that the woman he'd spent 45 years deceiving was finally learning how to be deceptive herself. Robert started showing up at Carmen's house during the second week of my absence, not demanding or angry, but with a kind of desperate confusion that was almost pitiful. He'd stand on the front porch holding grocery bags or takeout containers, looking through the screen door like a lost child who couldn't understand why he wasn't being invited inside. Elena's favorite Thai food from Bangkok Garden, he'd say to Carmen, who had become my fierce protector. Spring rolls and pad thai, extra spicy, just how she likes it. Carmen would take the food without inviting him in, her voice coolly polite. I'll make sure she gets it, Robert. But I could see him through the living room window. And what struck me wasn't his sadness. It was his bewilderment. For 45 years, he'd been the one with the power in our relationship. He'd controlled the information, controlled the narrative, controlled how much of himself he shared. My love had been constant and predictable, something he could count on like sunrise. Now, for the first time in our marriage, he didn't know what I was thinking or what I might do next. He started calling Carmen's house at all hours, early morning, late evening, during the dinner hour when he knew we'd be together. When Carmen answered, he'd ask to speak to me with increasing desperation. Just tell me what you need, he pleaded during one call I overheard. Tell me what I have to do to fix this. I don't think Elena knows yet, Carmen would reply, her voice maddeningly calm. She's still processing. Processing? Such a simple word that gave away nothing while implying everything. I was processing his lies, processing our marriage, processing whether there was anything left worth saving. The uncertainty was killing him, and I found myself surprisingly unmoved by his suffering. He began reaching out to our neighbors, our friends, anyone who might have influence with me. Dorothy Kellerman called to say Robert had stopped by, looking terrible, and asking if she'd heard from me. He seems so lost, Elena, Dorothy said, her voice full of sympathy for the wrong person. He says he made some mistakes, but he loves you so much. Maybe you could just talk to him. I thanked Dorothy politely and hung up, marveling at how even now people wanted to make me responsible for managing Robert's feelings. But their calls told me something important. Robert was unraveling publicly, and that gave me leverage I'd never had before. The most telling sign of the power shift came when he started showing up at my doctor's appointments, my hair salon, the library where I'd volunteered for years.
He wasn't stalking me.
He was searching for clues about where I was and what I was planning. The man who had kept secrets for 45 years was terrified that I might be keeping secrets from him. Has Elena mentioned anything about her plans? He asked my hairstylist, Maria, who called to warn me. Is she thinking about divorce? Is she seeing a lawyer? The questions revealed everything. Robert was afraid. Not just afraid of losing me, but afraid of losing control of the story. He'd spent decades managing information. And now he was on the outside looking in, reduced to pumping our neighbors and service providers for intelligence about his own wife's intentions. I began to understand something that had never occurred to me before. Robert's lies hadn't just hurt me, they'd made him weak. All those years of compartmentalizing his life, of remembering which stories to tell which people, of living in constant fear that his worlds might collide, had exhausted him. He'd built his entire identity around being the one who knew everything while others knew nothing. Now I was the one with knowledge he didn't have. I knew about Sophia, about his family, about the scope of his deception. But more importantly, I knew what I was planning to do about it, and he didn't. For the first time in our marriage, Robert Martinez was powerless, and Elena Martinez was just getting started. The student had become the teacher, and class was about to begin. I chose our 45th wedding anniversary for the confrontation because some poetry demands to be written in irony. Robert had been begging me to come home for weeks, promising we could work through this and start fresh, as if 45 years of lies could be resolved with good intentions and couples therapy. When I finally agreed to have dinner with him at our house on July 15th, the relief in his voice was heartbreaking. I'll cook your favorite, he said, his words tumbling over each other with desperate hope. Salmon with that lemon butter sauce you love. And I'll pick up a bottle of that wine from our honeymoon, the one we save for special occasions. I almost laughed at the word special. Our anniversary dinner was going to be special, all right, just not in the way he imagined. I spent the afternoon preparing with the same methodical care I'd once used to plan surprise parties for him. I printed out every screenshot I'd saved from Sophia's Facebook page, organizing them chronologically in a manila folder. I practiced what I wanted to say, timing myself to ensure I could get through it without breaking down. This wasn't going to be an emotional explosion. This was going to be a presentation of facts. When I arrived at our house, it felt strange to think of it as our house now. Robert was waiting on the front porch like an eager teenager. He was dressed in his best shirt, the blue one I'd bought him last Christmas, and his hair was freshly cut. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile, as if the weeks of uncertainty had aged him years. "Elena," he breathed, standing up so quickly he nearly knocked over the planter beside his chair. "You look beautiful." I was wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to the Kellerman's party, the one I'd been wearing when my world first started cracking apart. It seemed fitting. The house smelled like home, lemon oil and the salmon he'd been cooking, with underlying notes of the aftershave he'd worn for decades. For a moment, the familiarity almost undid me. This was our space, full of our memories, our shared life. But I forced myself to remember that those memories were built on a foundation of lies. "Dinner smells wonderful," I said, setting my purse on the kitchen counter along with the manila folder. "But before we eat, I think we need to talk." Robert's face brightened with hope. "Of course, Mamor. I've been thinking about what to say, how to make this right. I know I haven't been completely honest about some things, but some things—" I interrupted, pulling out the folder. "Robert, please sit down." He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, paid decades of bills, and made countless plans for a future I now realized had always been incomplete. I opened the folder and placed the first photo in front of him, Sophia's family gathering from last Christmas, with Robert at the center of it all. His face went completely white, then gray. I watched 45 years of careful deception crumble in the space of a heartbeat. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Your niece Sophia sent me a friend request on Facebook," I said, my voice steady as granite. Imagine my surprise discovering that my husband, who supposedly lost his entire family in a tragic accident, has been living a rich, full family life for our entire marriage. I placed photo after photo in front of him. Birthday parties, graduations, holiday celebrations, family reunions. Each image was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Another piece of evidence that the man I'd loved completely had never existed. "I've spent 45 years being your only family, Robert," I continued, watching him stare at the photos like they might disappear if he looked hard enough. "I've mourned your parents every Christmas. I felt guilty for wanting children because I thought you were too traumatized by loss to risk loving again. I've made our marriage smaller and smaller to accommodate your supposed grief." "Elena, please let me explain."
No.
The word came out sharp as a blade. "You've had 45 years to explain. Now you're going to listen." Robert's composure finally shattered completely. The man who had spent 45 years carefully managing his image, controlling every piece of information that entered our home, collapsed into himself like a house of cards in a windstorm. His hands shook as he reached for the photos spread across our kitchen table. And when he spoke, his voice was the broken whisper of a child caught in an unforgivable lie. "Elena, I never meant for it to go this far," he said, tears streaming down his face. "It started so small. Just a way to start over." I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? I demanded, but my voice was calmer now, almost clinical. I'd moved beyond anger into something colder and more powerful. "Of who I was before you," he said, his words coming in gasps between sobs. "I was a terrible husband the first time, a terrible father. I drank too much. I cheated. I left my kids when they needed me most. When my first marriage fell apart, my family sided with Rebecca. They barely spoke to me for years. My world tilted again, this time in a completely different direction. First marriage. I was married before Elena for 12 years. Rebecca and I had 4 kids together." He was staring at his hands now, unable to meet my eyes. When I met you at that church social, you were so pure, so good. You deserve better than a man with that much baggage. So I told you they were all dead because, in a way, they were dead to me. I'd lost them through my own failures. The revelation hit me like ice water. Not only had he hidden his living family, he'd hidden an entire marriage for children, a whole life that had fallen apart because of his choices. I thought about all the times I'd consoled him for being an orphan. All the times I'd felt special for being enough family for someone who'd lost everything. You let me think I was your first and only love, I said, my voice deadly quiet. You let me believe our marriage was precious because it was all you had left. It was precious, he said desperately. Elena, you saved me. You made me want to be better. I stayed sober for you. I learned how to be faithful. I became the man I should have been the first time while secretly sending money to the family you told me was dead. His face went even paler. How did you know? 45 years of marriage, Robert? I know where every penny goes. I pulled out the bank statements I'd copied before leaving. The ones showing monthly transfers to accounts I'd never questioned because I trusted him completely. My inheritance money, my teacher's pension, money I earned from tutoring students after I retired. How much of it went to supporting the children you were too ashamed to claim? Elena, I can explain, $23,000 last year alone. I continued, reading from the highlighted statements. Money that could have sent us on the European vacation I dreamed about. Money that could have helped us renovate the house or set aside for our medical expenses. Instead, it went to college tuitions and down payments and birthday gifts for grandchildren I wasn't allowed to know existed. Robert was crying so hard now he could barely speak. I was trying to make amends to be the father and grandfather I should have been with my money. You were trying to rebuild your relationship with your real family using money you earned with a woman you considered temporary enough to lie to. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I wasn't just the wife he deceived. I was the resource he'd used to fund his redemption with the people who actually mattered to him. Every dollar I'd contributed to our household had been a dollar he could send to his children. Every sacrifice I'd made for our modest lifestyle had been money freed up for his guilt payments to his real family. You didn't just erase me from your family life, Robert, I said, standing up from the table with a calmness that surprised me. You used me to pay for it. The look of devastation on his face told me everything I needed to know. After 45 years of believing I was his salvation, I'd finally learned the truth. I'd been his biggest enabler, funding the very life I was excluded from, while thinking I was building something precious with the man I loved. The justice was perfect in its cruelty. He'd lost me and my money at exactly the moment his guilt-ridden generosity had finally earned him a place back in his real family's good graces. The Facebook message from Sophia arrived 2 days after I'd left Robert, sitting alone at our kitchen table, with the wreckage of his lies spread across the surface like tarot cards predicting his future. I was back at Carmen's house, mechanically packing the few belongings I'd brought with me, when my phone chimed with a notification that would change everything once again. Dear Elena, the message began, and I could almost hear a young woman's voice, warm and hopeful, speaking the words. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I found your name in Uncle Bobby's emergency contact list when Grandma Rose had her fall last week. We've been trying to reach him, but his phone seems to be going straight to voicemail. I sat down hard on Carmen's guest bed. Grandma Rose, the woman whose memorial candle I'd lit faithfully for 4 decades, had fallen. The woman who was supposed to be dead was injured and asking for her son, and I was the emergency contact he'd never thought would be called. I know this might sound strange, Sophia continued, but we've all been wondering about you for years. Uncle Bobby mentions you sometimes, but he always gets this sad look when we ask questions. We thought maybe something had happened, that you were sick, or I don't know, but then I saw you were on Facebook and thought maybe we could finally meet. The innocence in her words was devastating. This beautiful young woman, Robert's niece, had been wondering about me the same way I'd been wondering about his lost family, while I'd been lighting candles for people I thought were dead. They'd been worried that I might be the one who was gone. We're having Grandma's 93rd birthday party next month, the message continued. She's been talking about wanting to meet you ever since Uncle Bobby let slip that he was married. Would you maybe want to come? I know it's forward of me to ask, but family is so important to Grandma and your Uncle Bobby's family, which makes you our family, too. I stared at those last words until they blurred through my tears. Your Uncle Bobby's family, which makes you our family, too. Such simple logic, such automatic inclusion. This was how real families worked. They expanded to embrace the people their loved ones loved. They didn't create elaborate lies to keep people separated. Before I could second-guess myself, I typed back, "Hi, Sophia. Thank you for reaching out. I'd love to hear more about Grandma Rose's party." Her response came within minutes, as if she'd been waiting by her phone. OMG, yes. I'm so excited.
Can I call you?
I have so many questions, and there's so much I want to tell you about everyone. 20 minutes later, Sophia's voice filled Carmen's guest room through my phone speaker, bright and animated and utterly delighted to finally be talking to the mysterious aunt she'd wondered about for years. She told me about Grandma Rose, who still made the best tamales in Phoenix and insisted on beating everyone at Domino's despite her arthritis. She told me about her cousin Miguel, who is starting medical school, and her Aunt Rebecca, Robert's ex-wife, who had remarried a wonderful man and held no grudges. Aunt Rebecca always says, "Uncle Bobby became the man he was meant to be when he met you," Sophia said, her words carrying no trace of the bitterness I might have expected. She's grateful, actually. She says, "Whatever you did for him, it helped him become a good father to their kids later in life." The generosity of that statement floored me. Rebecca, the woman whose existence had been erased from my marriage, was grateful to me for helping Robert become better. She didn't see me as the other woman or the replacement wife. She saw me as part of the long, complicated story of a man learning how to love properly. "Will you really come to the party?" Sophia asked, her voice hopeful. "Everyone wants to meet you. We've been waiting so long." I looked around Carmen's guest room at the small pile of belongings that represented my current life and realized I was at a crossroads. I could stay angry, stay wounded, stay focused on what Robert had taken from me, or I could accept the gift his family was offering, the chance to be part of something larger than the pain he'd caused. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "I'd love to come." For the first time in months, I was making a choice based on hope instead of hurt. 6 months later, I sit in my favorite corner booth at Desert Rose Cafe, a new ritual I've created for Saturday mornings, video calling with people I never imagined would become the center of my world. The screen shows me Sophia's art studio in Tucson, where she's putting finishing touches on a painting while her 2-year-old son, Miguel, scribbles on paper beside her with the intense concentration only toddlers possess. "Show Grandma Elena your dinosaur," Sophia encourages, and Miguel holds up a blue and green masterpiece that bears no resemblance to any prehistoric creature, but fills my heart with inexplicable joy. "It's beautiful, mijo," I tell him, and he grins with paint-stained teeth before wandering off to create his next opus. The ease with which he calls me Grandma Elena still amazes me. Children don't carry the baggage of complicated histories. They simply accept love when it's offered. "How's the new apartment?" Sophia asks, adjusting her laptop so I can see more of her studio. It's chaos in the most beautiful way. Canvas everywhere, paintbrushes and coffee cans. The kind of creative mess that speaks of a life fully lived. "Perfect," I tell her. And I mean it. My one-bedroom apartment near Old Town Scottsdale is small but bright with a view of the mountains that changes color throughout the day. It's the first space in 45 years that's entirely mine. Decorated with things I chose because I loved them, not because they matched a life Robert and I had built together. The divorce was finalized last month. Robert signed the papers without contesting anything, perhaps understanding that fighting me would only make his betrayal more public. He kept the house and most of the furniture, material things that felt contaminated by lies. I kept my dignity, half our savings, and something far more valuable, the family I'd gained through his deception. Dad called again yesterday, Sophia mentions casually, as she does every few weeks. Robert has been trying to rebuild relationships with his children and grandchildren, showing up at family gatherings with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who finally understands what he's been missing.
He asked about you.
What did you tell him? I ask, though the answer doesn't affect me the way it might have months ago. That you're happy, that you're living your life, that maybe someday the two of you can figure out how to be in the same room for Miguel's birthday party. But that's up to both of you. Sophia has become my unexpected ally in this strange new world, helping me navigate relationships with people who share my last name, but not my history with Robert. She's wise beyond her 28 years, understanding instinctively that families can be rebuilt in configurations their original architects never imagined. My phone buzzes with a text from Dr. Chun, my therapist, reminding me about our session Tuesday. I've kept seeing her even though the crisis that brought me to therapy has passed. She's helping me understand something profound. I didn't lose myself when I discovered Robert's lies. I found myself. The Elena who lights up at Miguel's art and looks forward to Sophia's calls is more authentically me than the Elena who spent 45 years trying to be enough for a man who was never fully present. I have news, Sophia says, her face lighting up with barely contained excitement. Rebecca and Tom are hosting Thanksgiving this year, and she specifically asked me to invite you. She wants to finally meet the woman who helped raise her children's father. The invitation would have terrified me months ago. Now it feels like coming home to a place I've never been. I'm 73 years old, and I'm learning that love given completely is never wasted, even when it's given to someone incapable of receiving it fully. Because that love made me capable of recognizing real love when it finally arrived, packaged in ways I never expected. Tell Rebecca yes, I say, watching Miguel try to paint his grandmother's portrait on Sophia's studio wall.
Tell her I'd be honored.
Sometimes the family you deserve finds you in the ruins of the family you thought you had. Sometimes starting over at 73 means discovering you were never as lost as you believed. You were just looking for home in the wrong places. Through my cafe window, the Arizona mountains catch the morning light, and I think about all the sunrises I have left to see. Each one will be mine to choose, mine to celebrate, mine to share with people who see me clearly and love me anyway. That's what real family looks like. And it was worth waiting 73 years to find.